Hi, everyone. Today I'm here with Patrick Findaro, co-founder of Visa Franchise and Vetted Biz. He specializes in helping foreign entrepreneurs, investors, and others to identify U.S. franchise opportunities for E-2 and EB-5 investor visas. Based in Miami, he has helped thousands of clients secure franchises. Patrick, it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Hey, thanks for having us on.
So today I'd like to speak with you about the considerations, benefits, and cost of buying a franchise for E-2 investors. I think the E-2 investor visa is a great opportunity for those investors who are seeking to invest and reside in the U.S. Investors must be from a treaty country, invest a substantial amount that is at risk. Generally, we recommend $100,000, and they have to actively direct and develop the business. So it cannot be a passive investment, as you know, and the business must meet the marginality requirement. We've seen many investors considering starting their own business versus buying a franchise. So what do you think are the advantages for a foreign investor in buying a franchise rather than building a brand new concept from scratch in the United States?
I think it depends, like if it's overwhelming doing everything that's required in the business, like the vendor relationships, the initial clients, the marketing, all franchises, you're going to have to manage a team, train a team, and also manage the initial clients. But some franchises, you also have to do sales, lead gen. But it gives you, depending on the franchise brand, you can just focus on less things. And I remember our first client together from the UK, he came from the caregiving space, social work space, and he decided to not do his own independent business and went with an in-home care franchise because they, handle all the regulatory and they had the branding and he could get more leads from them. So he could really just focus on developing the team and closing key contracts. So I think if you're already selling in the US market and like you're in Mexico or Canada and you already have American customers, it can make great sense to just do your own business and expand your business to the US. But if you're coming from farther away and you don't already have experience in the US market, I think franchising can be a great fit and it's at least worth a look. And we can offer that, free service to your clients when they come for you to look for 2 months and see what's out there that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that U.S. embassies around the world, they favor the franchise business model, especially if you're with a proven franchise that has a successful business model and readily financial available. So I think looking at franchises are definitely a great opportunity for E2 investors. Are there any specific industries or franchise models that you are seeing right now that have high rates of success for E2 investors?
Ali, when we first started back in 2015, it was a lot of like brick and mortar type businesses, say like restaurants or where there's a physical build out, but it's a pain. You have to find the location, build it out, get the permitting. It could take like 12 months, 18 months, and you're just burning cash. So we prefer the service type businesses, business services, home services that you can open up quickly and break even quickly. And as terms of for the E2 visa, I think a lot depends on the country, where you have certain countries like in Canada where it's a general breeze. Mexico, we love, where it's, yeah, okay, they see it's a business, franchise business, they've invested the funds, and then it just comes down to the investor if they think he's going to be able to direct and develop it. And then you have certain countries that they don't like certain industries as much, and we know that now, having helped hundreds of clients. So I would say, well, let's focus on the business that makes the most sense, and then Ali will handle the visa part, but our job is to get the right business and make sure you're going to make money. And then, Ali will work to sell this to the consulate officer.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think, working with you in the past with many different investor clients, making sure that they choose the right business model that they feel comfortable that they're going to have success in is critical. And also two other things that we've noticed is making sure to choose the right location, where you want to live, and then see if there's an existing franchise that's in that area that you can operate. And I think that'll increase your happiness when you're settling into the United States. So, plan where you want to live and design around that is kind of the motto that we preach here. And I think down the road, it makes you more happy and you'll be more of a successful franchisee operator. So, Patrick, a lot of investors also ask us about semi-absentee models. So how realistic is that when buying a franchise, and what level of day-to-day involvement should a franchisee actually expect to qualify for an E-2 investor visa?
All great questions. What I would say is like, show me the money. If you're investing in 80K, 100K, 120K, you're gonna have to work a lot, 30 to 50 hours a week. There's gonna be a lot more options available if you're willing to put the time in. And then if you're gonna work like 10, you don't want to work much more than 10 to 20 hours a week. I would say I invest at least 150,000, and you're effectively managing the day-to-day manager. If that guy quits though, you got to be the one running the show, and you're going to work again, 40 hours a week. And then you have some options that it's investing 200 to 300K, where there could be an arrangement with the franchisor to support with a lot of the day-to-day operations, where you have more of like an executive type role, CFO type role, and maybe you're focused on also expanding into other businesses, whether it's in the same franchise brand or not. So it's a scale. I prefer the clients that are going to work day to day in the business, at least the first 18 months, and just grind it for 18 months, 24 months. And then, you can take a breath once you're making like 10K a month. And then you can think about the day-to-day manager, and that would be the most secure way to go semi-absentee. Is you create the culture, you nurture the culture, you open up the office, and then you assign a manager, or maybe you help them get an essential employee on the E-2 to manage the day-to-day affairs, and someone that they trust, whether it's a family member or former colleague from their country of origin.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. For semi-absentee businesses, although they definitely can qualify, the E-2 visa requires that the investor direct and develop the enterprise. So if they purchase or they're going to run as a semi-absentee business owner, the U.S. government may question them on how actively they are in the management. So if the investor is going to buy a franchise, we generally recommend, like you, that they be the on-site operator. And typically, we also recommend using a holding company structure for those operators, because then they can not only operate that franchise as long as the franchise allows it, but then they can go into other diverse sectors as well, so they're not just tied to one business area. What are some of the other factors that you believe investors should consider when buying a franchise?
Well, you said location, and there's a lot of amazing, small, mid-sized cities like Milwaukee. I want to focus on the big Los Angeles, Miami, New York. These are expensive places. The quality of life's not that high unless you're rich. Some people might hate on that comment, but I think there's a lot of really nice small mid-sized cities. So unless your spouse has a stellar job or can secure a really stellar job in finance, tech, or high paid job, and you have to be in one of those cities, I would select a location that monthly rents aren't that high for commercial space, and there is ample opportunity to grow the franchise brand in that market, and the demographics support it. So I would focus. It's different if you have family and you really want to reunite with your extended family, parents, brother, etc., and they're in that city. That makes a lot of sense. Or your spouse is going to make a lot of money in one of those major metro areas. But the US has a lot of incredible smaller cities, mid-sized cities. So I would really encourage people to look at those. Look beyond where you've gone for tourism purposes, and like, what's like a really livable city. I would say, Milwaukee is a more livable city than Miami. Miami is nice. Miami Beach is great, but does it have, all the infrastructure to support, a growing family that as nice to raise kids as Milwaukee? Or how are the public schools? Yes, you can make it work in Miami. There are some great public schools. It's mostly private schools though. So I would really look and do your research on where you want to live, and try to spend like 1 month, 2 months exploring some of these potential towns and cities.
Yes, I think that's excellent advice. Location is a huge factor that they should be considering. And like you said, these small to mid-market cities offer great quality of life and great value. Whereas in some of these larger metropolitan areas, you are going to spend a lot more of what you're earning, and the quality of life might not be as good. I think that's
Sarasota too, where you have an office. Great place. My aunt lives in Punta Gorda. I spent a lot of time on the west coast of Florida, and I have a client that just moved to Venice. Numerous clients have moved to
love
Sarasota,
Venice.
and I only hear good things.
Yes, I'm biased toward the west coast of Florida. So when an investor purchases a franchise, the franchisor must provide a disclosure document to prospective investors. When you're helping a client to review that franchise disclosure document, what are some of the biggest red flags that you tell them to look out for?
Litigation. So imagine like if someone sued one of our companies and it like went to court, a lot of bad stuff probably happened that you couldn't resolve it. And you couldn't just like one party pays the other, or you just resolve it amicably. So the fact that a franchisor and a franchisee have to went to that level where they filed a lawsuit and it's in the franchise disclosure document. Okay, one time that happened and there's 100 locations. Okay. There was one franchise I looked at, there were 5 litigations with 50 franchisees. And it's like, wow. So the ratio matters, but that's a red flag. The balance sheet, cash flow statement, income statement of the franchisor. Who are these guys? Is it fly by night? If they have a bad year, do they have reserves to like, really put cash in and support their franchisees? Item 19 that shows the financials on the economics of the franchise on the franchisee level. 98% of the franchise brands we recommend have the item 19, although I think it's like 60% or 58% actually have one in the universe of like 3,600 franchise brands that we have the franchise disclosure documents for. Openings, closures, there's been a lot of units reacquired by the franchisor. That's a red flag. I want to know why. Like, that Dutch Bros, I don't know if you've been to Dutch Bros, they used to franchise and they bought a bunch of their franchisees out, and that made sense. It was probably like a massive win and they paid a lot of money for their franchisees. At times the franchisor is reacquiring struggling locations and it's effectively hiding what would be a closure. And then the items, 7, how much it's going to cost to open the franchise business, the ranges. So that there's a lot of stuff. And I think with Claude and ChatGPT, it's going to make it a lot easier for, if you're watching this, you as a prospective investor to really take ownership of this. I'm here to help and guide you, and you'll validate it with existing franchisees, but you have a lot of tools at your disposal to really own this and know what you're signing now.
Yeah, I think it's critical for the franchisee to review that franchise disclosure document and look at those red flags that you were just mentioning, and it's going to cover the business model, the startup costs, legal history, like you said, has there been litigation, the obligations of that franchisee, and it allows the franchisee also to create a business plan. That's one of the requirements for the E-2 visa, is to have a 5-year financial plan. And so I think, the FDD helps with fulfilling the marginality requirement by showing that the investor is going to be able to create jobs here in the United States. And working with Patrick and his team at Visa Franchise, they're going to help you go through that document to make sure you feel comfortable with all the terms and your obligations. And having his experience is going to be invaluable to you. With that being said, Patrick, you've done hundreds of franchises. What's your exact process for helping an investor align with their personal budget, their skills, and timeline to find that perfect brand that fits them?
So our sister company, Vetted Biz, we have 7,000 franchise brands. We have the FDD for 3,600. Of those 3,600, there's about 500 that we know are friendly to E2 Visa investors, L1 Visa investors, EB5 investors, or nationals moving to the US looking to use that franchise as the anchor for their visa petition. But of those, there's like 65 that we've vetted the franchise brand due diligence pass. And then there's probably 20 limited pass. Maybe we've just been able to talk to one franchisee and we want to validate with another 4 or 5. Or there's some, yellow flags or one red flag, but there's also a lot of redeeming factors about that franchise brand. We'll tell the clients like, hey, this isn't a full pass. We think this concept has potential, but let's dive into it deeper, or it could make sense in just certain geographies of the US where that franchise brand has already, a big brand presence. And then there's like a graveyard of just franchise brands we don't like. They're just not, I shouldn't laugh, but there's just a lot of BS franchise brands that, someone sold them on the concept that they could franchise their business. And now they're selling other people that they have a business that people should invest in.
Yeah, I think like the case that you had mentioned earlier about the home care franchise that we worked on together, when you walk that client through the process, you were able to help them look at different franchise opportunities in the home care space They met with those franchisors, they learned about the business model, and then they eventually chose the one that worked for them. So I think your team really walks investors through the process step by step and, really provides a white glove service. Beyond the initial franchise fee, what other hidden cost or build out expenses or working capital requirements do foreign investors usually underestimate?
I would say the grand opening, or maybe they just forget about it. And it could be in the FDD that there's a 10,000 grand opening expense, but it's the kind of and I don't blame them. It's the last thing you want to do. You got to the US, you spent all this money, and now the franchisor is like, oh, you gotta put 5K into meta ads, and you gotta buy this. Our clients before, say 5 years ago, they would push back, and now we're just reminding them like, hey, you signed up for this, listen to the franchisor for 18 to 24 months, and then you can pick up your head. But you signed up for this. Like if you didn't want to follow the plan, don't do a franchise. So that's one thing that kind of comes to mind.
Yeah, but the benefit, I guess, of those costs that may be underestimated is we can use those as source of funds to prove that they're investing in this company. So one of the main requirements for E2 investors that they need to be aware of is being able to show how they sourced the funds that they used for the investment, where they were earned, saved, or otherwise how they obtained those funds used for the purchase. So that's where our firm comes in to help you guys to do that. Generally, we need to show like an employment contract, savings account, inheritance documents, or other loan documents to source those funds. But I think everybody should really be aware of those things that Patrick was discussing, those hidden costs. Him and his team will be able to show you those too, so you are prepared for those when it comes time to immigrate to the U.S.
Ali, just thinking. So I mean, because at the franchise level, there's so many less hidden costs, and if you're just starting your own independent business because of the variability, where the franchise, it's like there's another 400 locations, and they put in this federally regulated document what they estimate the low and the high end to be. And if it's like really high consistently, like you could have a claim and file a claim with the Federal Trade Commission or in a court. So they're careful in terms of like no hidden cost. There's some ongoing costs that the technology fee, but all those things, they should be earning their keep, and you should be well informed, validating with existing franchisees before you decide to invest. Hidden costs, the U.S. is expensive, so even those small mid-sized towns, you got to allocate at least 50K, 60K just to live in the US. And I wouldn't wind down your income streams. Like if you own a business in Canada, Mexico, Argentina, don't shut it down. Don't sell it unless it's for like a great value. Get that income in and slow it down maybe, or have a manager of that business. Because it can take a little while to make that 5K, make that $10,000 a month. And ideally your spouse can work in the beginning too, or roll up his or her sleeves and really grow the business. But I think in the US, if the spouse is able to work, get health insurance, that can help a lot, because I guess another hidden cost that can come up for a business owner is health insurance is high, and it's gone up a lot in 2026. So I think I would advocate for the combo of E2 visa investor in the franchise, and the spouse does some work and is able to get a health insurance, and I think that resolves a lot of the hidden cost.
Yes, I agree. I think that all the costs are going to be disclosed, and you mentioned like those hidden costs of once you settle into the United States, those are
Yeah.
things that you might not be thinking about. Even like the cost of the credit to purchase a vehicle or purchase a home, because you don't have an established U.S. credit history yet. Those costs are going to be higher for an initial investor that's moving to the United States. One of the biggest fears that investors have is losing their money if a consulate denies their visa. Can you explain how escrow agreements can be used to protect their franchise fee until the E2 visa is approved?
Definitely. So we advocate. I'm not really a fan that if they're denied, especially after a second attempt, that the franchisor just keeps their franchise fee. I think that's silly. But at the same time, should the investor get all their money back if this franchisor has spent 100 hours validating, providing documents, So I think what's fair is that there's some sunk cost. So, the professional fees, maybe $10,000 of the franchise fee, and then those other costs, like the other, say 30K of the franchise fee of a total of 40K could be escrowed. And, it could be through a bank or law firm. There could be also a contractual obligation that, okay, you paid the franchisor, but if it doesn't work out, and that's where you want to make sure their balance sheet's good and they have the cash, that they can unwind the transaction, send you that 30K. So your loss is, 20K, 25K. God forbid you don't get it after a second attempt. And maybe you bought a vehicle, maybe you bought some other items that you can get 90% of the value back, 95% of the value back. So thankfully we don't do this that often where we have to unwind the transaction. For franchise, it has happened with the franchise business, but it is very rare. And I can't think of a case where the client didn't get, the majority of his franchise fee back, even if they weren't contractually obligated. Like I had a case recently that I won't mention his nationality, but he was denied because he had overstayed in the US like 8 years ago. And it's like a white collar worker between jobs. He had overstayed and was out of status. But that got him denied, and he had to try it twice. He tried it at two different consulates. And the franchise gave him most of the franchise fee back. They didn't have to do that, though.
Yeah, I think the E-2 compliant escrow agreement is a great tool to mitigate financial risk for investors. And just for, for the audience that's watching, all the investors that we worked with, Patrick, with have been approved. So 100% approval rating from our law firm and Visa Franchise working together.
One last comment. There are franchisors that the whole amount can be escrowed, but it will just limit the options. Because some will say, no, if this doesn't work out, I want to be compensated a little bit for my time. But there are some, if someone's really risk adverse from the immigration side, then yes, we could do that. And it's just going to limit what franchises. We'll try, we'll ask, but it will limit the options.
Yes, it's dependent on what's agreed to by the franchisor. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Patrick. Appreciate it. So also for foreign investors that are relocating to the US to operate a franchise, what are some tips that you have for them to kind of settle into the United States?
Spend time like beforehand, like all your vacation time in the US. So whether that's a month, if you're coming from Europe, 10 weeks, you're spending in the US, understand what you're getting into. And then, focus on the business, and your kids will transition just fine. The spouse that doesn't work will probably have the hardest transition. So ideally both spouses are working, whether it's on that business together, rolling up the sleeves, or one of them was working remote back with the home country business. But I would say keep your mind occupied and just focus on the transition with your family, but do your research up front and understand what you're getting into.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think, for E2 investors too, that if you have a dependent spouse, they're able to work on that E2 dependent visa as soon as they enter the United States. So that's a great benefit for them. Patrick, I appreciate your time today and explaining to us the top considerations for people that are looking to buy a franchise. How can people learn more about you and Visa Franchise and get a hold of you?
Definitely. I mean, I think we prefer when there's like a warm introduction. So, ideally you've already engaged Ali's firm and you're already in the process and you've committed to the E2 visa. But if you're still like uncertain, we're happy to have a initial consultation to see how we could potentially help you and review some franchise options. We have a YouTube channel too, where I interview former franchisees, our former clients, franchisors too. So can check out that content. But our website, Patrick at visafranchise.com. But the offer stands. If you just come to us directly, we'll have to charge you to do the franchise research analysis. But if you come from Ali's firm, if you've engaged them for some services, then we offer that franchise search and brand due diligence at no cost to you.
Well, thank you again so much, Patrick. And if you're out there and you're ready to start your E2 visa journey, just reach out to me and my team at Subhan Law. You can visit our website, and we help foreign investors with business formation, tax, and investment-based immigration. We look forward to working with you. Thank you, Patrick, again for your time today.
Thanks, Ollie. Appreciate it.